Hey everybody, welcome back to our next video on our ongoing exploration of Various Things Church. This time around we are continuing with our Lenten theme of brokenness and also experiencing the presence of God in those different times. Now I want to offer up a little side note to a change from our anticipated schedule. Originally, we anticipated that we would be focusing on the biblical character of Elijah this week, but thanks to some wintry weather here right in the middle of March, or actually in late March now, that is tripping us up for our Lent midweek activities. We are doing a switch. So we're actually looking at the story of Peter, who was broken by failure, and specifically the story found in Luke chapter 22, verses 54 through 62, which is Peter's threefold denial of Jesus. If you're curious, we will still have the week when we focus in and zero in on the story of Elijah, but we're going to bump that one back to the end of the season. So that will actually be the week of Wednesday, April 9th. So just a little bit of a switch because of the winter weather kind of messing things up. So this time around, we are looking at Peter. So I'm going to give you some background on the character, what we see of him throughout the course of the various Gospels and why he is important. And then we'll actually talk just a little bit about some of this information with this story. But of course, I'm going to let you in your group have their time of discussion with that. So that's what we're going to talk about. First of all, background of the character. We know the guy as Peter. His given name is Simon. Now, Simon is a Greek variant, or a Greek version, if we want to use that word, of the Hebrew name Simeon. Simeon was one of the sons of Jacob, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and therefore that's also one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Simeon, like most Hebrew names, means something specific, and the Hebrew Simeon means God has heard or God is listening. So that's what the name Simeon means. Now, Simon or Simeon would have been a very common Jewish name because of that history going all the way back into the patriarchal history, the history of the Jewish patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and arguably Joseph too, but that's Joseph's up in the air. Anyway, so because of the importance as one of the sons of Jacob, Simeon or Simon, a lot of people would have had that name. That was kind of common within that culture. Now, the name Peter, or Cephas in Aramaic, or Petros in Greek, this is a nickname given by Jesus, which means rock or solid rock. Now, side note, joke, and I want to be sure on that. I was once asked by a confirmation student, what is the Greek or the Aramaic word for moron or idiot or fool? And I kind of blanked for a second, and then it occurred to me, oh, it's raka, which kind of sounds like rock, aka Peter or Petros. And we find this in Matthew 5, verse 22. Maybe because Peter seems to screw up so much, that's why Jesus gave him the nickname Rock or Raka, which means idiot. Probably not, but it's fun to speculate on that. Coming back in, when we first see Peter, or Simon, Peter, same guy, he's first introduced in Matthew chapter 4, in which Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee and encounters Peter along with his brother Andrew, calls them as the first two disciples, immediately followed up by James and John, who are also fishermen. Mark 1 is the same story. Luke 4 is a very similar version of the same story that also results in the calling of the disciples. But actually, the first encounter that we have with Peter, or Simon, is just before that in Luke chapter 4. Following a Sabbath exorcism in the Capernaum synagogue, Jesus then goes from the synagogue into Peter's house, or Simon's house, where he heals his mother-in-law with a fever. Then immediately after that in chapter 5, then we have the story of the calling of the first four disciples, or actually the first three, because Andrew is not named in that one. But that includes the miraculous catch of fish encounter between Jesus and Simon. We actually just had that story within our worship gospel lessons just a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that one maybe sounds familiar to you. And then in John, it's John chapter 1. Actually, Andrew's the hero of this one. Andrew first encounters Jesus after Jesus is pointed out by John the Baptist. Andrew spends some time with Jesus and then goes and finds Peter and brings Peter to Jesus. And in that first encounter in John's gospel, Jesus gives the nickname, "You are Simon, I will call you Peter." Let's go on a little tangent there. With the name change from Simon to Peter, John, as I mentioned, right away, when they first meet, that's when it happens. In Matthew, it happens in chapter 16, where we also have the story of Jesus changing the name. "You are Simon, I will call you Peter." And then in Mark and Luke, they're just a narrative comment of Simon, who is called Peter. And in both of those two versions, it's during the listing of the 12 disciples. Basically, Jesus is naming who the 12 disciples are, and we hear Simon, who Jesus calls Peter. So that's when we have those. So we don't get the story of the name change, more of just an editorial comment. Background, some more background. Peter was, of course, a fisherman. We've already kind of talked about that, along with his brother Andrew, and they are partners with James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And they are, of course, the first four disciples called by Jesus. Peter lives in Capernaum. Capernaum was a pretty bustling community on the northwestern corner of the Sea of Galilee. It was a fishing community by a lot of rights, and also was a trade route more so an intersection of a couple different trade routes. So it was a pretty busy community and a pretty good sized community as far as things went at that time. John's gospel, though, rather than Capernaum, says that Peter was from a town called Bethsaida. Bethsaida is just a little bit farther around to the east, still on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, so it's close to Capernaum, but it's a little ways away. But kind of a similar type of situation. It's maybe was not quite as important of a community as Capernaum, but John says that at least Peter was from there. We don't know if he still lived there or not, but he was from there according to John's gospel. Okay, now let's switch gears. Let's think a little bit about some of Peter's many failures, since that's the theme of this particular week. This is some, though not all, because of course Peter is really good at being human and messing things up. At the Transfiguration, we actually just heard that a few weeks ago, that he blurts out some stuff without thinking, or he doesn't know what he's saying. Rebuking Jesus following the first time that Jesus predicts his passion, Peter rebukes Jesus, and then Jesus promptly rebukes Peter, when this is immediately following Peter's declaration of Jesus as the Messiah, which seems to add to the facepalm on that one. Post-resurrection, Peter, what do I have there? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to back up. At the garden, when Jesus is arrested, Peter is the one who cuts off one of the guards, or the servant to one of the guards cuts off his ear, and Jesus kind of gets after him about that. And then after the resurrection in the book of Acts, we have a story or a couple of different instances where Peter is associating with Gentiles, even going so far as eating with them, which was really a cultural no-no at the time, until some of his fellow Jewish followers of Jesus call him on it, and then he kind of backs away from that. Although that God corrects Peter on this front in the story that he has with Cornelius. I'm not going to go into that, but it's an important story in terms of the earliest followers of Jesus really beginning to see that this is for Gentiles as well. So that was an important situation. And then the other one that I'm going to list is the miracle when Jesus is walking on water, and Peter asks, "Can I do that too?" And he does for a moment, and then he gets freaked out and he begins to sink. And that is that aspect is unique to Matthew's gospel. That miracle of Jesus walking on water shows up in the other gospels, but only Matthew has Peter doing it too. Then we have this story, the specific story, and this is part of the larger passion narrative. At the Last Supper, Jesus tells Peter that this denial is going to happen, and all four gospels include that detail. So this one is one that it's not unique. It's listed in all four gospels. Likewise, all four gospels also do include the threefold denial, not just Luke's version that we have, but all four include the same situation with pretty common details. They all line up pretty well. So that's kind of the story leading up. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath, and then I'll let you get to your discussion. Now, John's gospel gives the best follow up to this whole situation of Peter's threefold denial. One of the resurrection appearances that happen along the seashore, we assume the Sea of Galilee, although we don't know, it's probably the Sea of Galilee. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" With a command each time: feed my sheep, watch my lambs. Basically like Jesus is kind of passing on leadership to Peter because he's about to depart from the world. And a lot of scholars believe that this could be considered Peter's redemption, because we have the 3 denials now with the 3 "do you love me's." And so that's kind of a really important follow-up that we have there in John's gospel. Matthew and Luke don't really offer very much, though Luke, also written by the same person who wrote the book of Acts. And of course, in the book of Acts, we see Peter step into some of that leadership role. So that's a little bit up in the air. Matthew doesn't really give us much. Luke, it's more in Acts. Mark does have one tiny little detail that I think is worth mentioning, but we have to do there's a little bit of reaching here. When the angels appear to the women at the tomb, they give the women instructions: go tell the disciples and Peter. And Mark is the only one that has that detail that singles out the disciples and Peter. Now, I shared a video years ago. You may remember this, or perhaps you've seen it. If not, you should search for it. You can find it on YouTube. Just look for Skit Guys Peter, and you should be able to find it. The Skit Guys, they act out various biblical stories in really creative ways. And I really, really like this one. So they insinuate that Peter needs to hear that Jesus is raised because of the sense of guilt that he has. And while I really like that, and it does kind of have some hints of what we hear in John's gospel with the whole threefold "do you love me" thing, it's not theologically accurate if we just consider Mark's gospel. So it's an interesting thing, and and I like it because I oftentimes wonder in Mark's gospel, why does it specify the disciples and Peter? Well, that's an interesting theory, but it's just a theory. So that's everything that I have. Hope that you have a great discussion as you look at the character of Peter and his failures, and yet the reminder that God is still with him and Jesus still loves him.